On a winter night, the vast ranch house glowed faint beneath the firelight. Ethan lay back in the long chair, eyes half closed as though asleep, though his heart thundered in his chest. At his feet, the maid knelt in silence, her slender hands cradling his calloused foot in warm water. Fingers moved slow across cracked skin, and in that instant his whole body caught fire. He clenched his jaw, fighting the surge until his hand suddenly closed tight around hers. Breath quickened, the air itself seemed to shift. Then, as if pulled by an unseen force, Ethan rose and drew Amara hard against his chest. Firelight flickered as their breaths mingled, and within him sounded a truth he could no longer deny. Tonight, the line between master and servant had begun to break. The first winds of winter whipped across the Montana ridges, sharp as a blade, carrying their chill through the wide valley of the Radcliffe Ranch. On the wooden porch of the main house, Ethan Radcliffe stood silent, his tall frame wrapped in a heavy ash-gray coat. Black hair streaked with silver hung over his brow, and his dark eyes carried the weight of 3 lost years. To those who looked from the outside, he seemed a man who had everything. Thousands of acres, herds beyond counting, chandeliers casting light on polished floors, rugs brought from New York, banquet tables always set with whiskey and meat. Yet within, the house lay as cold as a crypt. Every groan of wind through the cracks seemed to whisper that its halls now echoed only with absence. 3 years ago, a merciless fever had stolen his wife Clara and their little girl. He buried them beneath the old cottonwood on the hill behind the ranch. Since that day, Ethan lived by paper and work, land deeds, contracts, expansion, believing busyness might drown the hollow ache. But the more he built, the emptier the house became. Each night, when the fire died low, he faced only his own shadow and memories that would not fade. That evening, the valley burned under a crimson sunset. Beauty like that only sharpened his grief, reminding him of the ones who would never see it. A soft sound drew him back from thought. "Mr. Radcliffe?" The voice was quiet, hesitant, as if afraid to wake the silence itself. Ethan turned. In the doorway stood a young woman, slight of frame, her warm brown skin catching the last of the light. Gray-brown eyes shone like a misted lake. Her natural curls were tied back loosely, stray strands brushing sun-touched cheeks. She wore a worn brown work dress with an apron bound tight, a silver tray trembling in her hands. She lowered her head and spoke gently. "My name is Amara Bennett, the new maid from Virginia. Mrs. McAllister at the station recommended me." "I begin today, sir," Ethan gave a single nod. He was long used to silence in the house, to the stern housekeeper, to workers who never raised their eyes. Yet something in that timid voice was different, like a faint note breaking through the constant howl of wind. Amara stepped into the vast dining hall, where the long wooden table shone with a cold sheen. She set down the tray, a bowl of beef stew, a few slices of toasted bread, a glass of water. As she adjusted the setting, her hand brushed his broad one resting on the table. It was only a fleeting touch, yet both stilled. Her hand was small, fragile, trembling, yet warm. Ethan pulled his away, a sudden tightening in his chest. It had been so long since another hand had reached him, not since the day he let go of Clara's lifeless arm in the fever's grip. Amara's face flushed. She dropped her gaze and stepped back, flustered. As she turned, her eyes caught on the east wall. There hung the great portrait, Clara in her white gown holding their little daughter. In the lamplight, the gentle face seemed still to smile across the room. Amara lingered, longer than courtesy allowed. In her gray-brown eyes flickered a sorrow deep and unspoken. Not curiosity, not pity. Something else, an understanding born of loss. Ethan noticed. His heart struck hard against his ribs. He had known pity, envy, caution, but never had anyone looked upon that portrait with such quiet gentleness. For the first time in years, he felt he was not utterly alone. Realizing she had stood too long, Amara startled, lowered her head, and slipped quickly through the door. Her small figure vanished behind heavy wood. Silence fell again. Ethan sat, eyes still drawn to the portrait. Clara remained there in memory, forever tender, forever gone. Yet tonight, beside her image, another had appeared, the fleeting eyes of a stranger. He raised his hand, fingertips brushing the spot where Amara's touch had lingered. A small contact, yet enough to stir the stone within his chest. Outside, the winter wind howled through the valley, but inside the great house, amid the smell of toasted bread and steaming stew, Ethan recognized a truth. The home that had long been a tomb had just heard the first footsteps strong enough to wake his heart. Night fell swift in Montana, sharper still when the winter winds swept the valley. The Radcliffe ranch house glowed faintly with lamplight, its long corridors swallowing every sound. Ethan Radcliffe was accustomed to this silence. The crackle of logs in the hearth, the wind's whistle through window panes. But tonight, as he descended the stairs, another sound reached him. Not footsteps, not the draft moaning through cracks. It was a song. A thin, trembling voice rose from the kitchen. Not steady, not trained, but heavy with sorrow, each note carrying a quiet yearning as though pulled from far away. Ethan stopped at the bend of the hallway, standing still as the sound drifted through the dark. Amara Bennett stood at the wash basin, rinsing bowls, steam curling around her gentle face. Her lips moved softly, releasing an old spiritual from Virginia, songs her grandmother once sang as night closed in. A song of those who had gone, of winters without spring, yet within its sadness shimmered a fragile hope. It was not perfect. Notes faltered, breaths caught. Yet that fragility reached the deepest place in Ethan. He heard in it the ghost of memory. Nights when Clara had held their child close and sung in a voice meant to keep fear away. Now, in a kitchen meant only for clatter, the sound brought back a warmth thought lost, and with it, something new. His hand tightened on the banister, chest constricted. He could not recall how long it had been since he heard a song. In Amara's voice was loneliness laid bare, and it struck the wound he himself had buried. She sang on, unaware of her listener. Head bent, body swaying gently, hands moving through dishwater under the glow of the lamp. When the melody reached its final lines, her voice trembled harder, as though memory itself broke through her strength. Then she lifted her gaze. Her gray-brown eyes widened as she saw Ethan in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the floorboards. She gasped. The bowl slipped from her wet hands, shattering against the stone with a sharp crack. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, dropping to her knees, hands trembling as she gathered the shards. Ethan stepped quickly forward, crouching with her. His large hand met hers over a broken piece. They froze at the touch. Amara bowed her head, cheeks burning, lips pressed tight. Ethan looked at her, and in that moment he understood. Behind her quiet labor and timid manner was not just a servant seeking work. There was a soul scarred, a young woman fighting her loneliness with songs in the night. His voice came low, rough. No need to apologize. For a fleeting instant she looked up, eyes glistening, then dropped them again, clutching the last shards. I didn't know you were here. I just sang so it wouldn't feel so empty. The words struck Ethan deep. He said nothing, only studied her face in the lamplight, strong yet fragile enough to stir his will to protect. The housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, entered then, frowning at the broken bowl. Amara stood quickly, clutching the remaining dish, murmuring, "I'll clean it at once, ma'am." Mrs. Henderson shook her head, muttered, and left, silence closing in again. Ethan remained, his eyes on the small figure bent over her task. A quiet stirring rose in him, like the fire in the hearth glowing brighter. That night, when he returned to his room, sleep would not come. In the silence, her fragile song lingered, cutting deep, yet kindling a truth he could not deny. He was no longer entirely alone in the great house. That night, the fire in the hearth burned low, casting faint red light across the wooden walls. Ethan Radcliffe slumped in the long chair of his study. The day had been spent buried in ledgers and contracts, the numbers weaving together until his head felt carved from stone. He leaned back, eyes closed, body sinking into weariness. Yet beneath it, he did not wholly rest. He listened. He waited. A soft knock sounded at the door. Ethan did not open his eyes, though the corner of his mouth twitched. The door creaked, and a draft swept in with a familiar figure. Amara Bennett entered, her steps light as though afraid to disturb the silence. In her hands she carried a basin of warm water, steam rising to mingle with the firelight and brighten the room. She set it down and knelt at his feet. Her voice came in a whisper. "Permit me, sir, to wash your feet. The warmth may help you sleep." The words were so quiet they might have vanished if not for the hush. But Ethan heard each one. He kept his eyes closed, feigning sleep, though his heart stumbled against his ribs. Amara lifted his foot into the basin. Warm water flowed over calloused skin, spreading like a gentle stream. Her fingers moved with care along his foot, his calf, each touch timid yet tender. Ethan bit down to keep from sighing aloud. Years had passed since he had known such simple care. Though his eyes stayed shut, his body tensed. Each pass of the warm cloth carried more than heat. It seeped into the marrow of his chest. He had lived long with strength, with solitude's chill, believing he needed no hand but his own. Yet the small hand of this girl left him unsteady. Amara bent close, unaware he was awake. She murmured almost to herself, "Your skin is rough from work. I hope tonight you rest easier." Ethan swallowed hard. The words struck him like a prayer. When she finished, she drew his feet from the water, dried each toe, and pulled the blanket over his waist. Her breath carried the faint scent of bread and soap. She rose to leave, then hesitated. From her pocket she drew a small tin, its lid scratched with wear. Opening it, she released the scent of herbs. She took his rough hands in hers, tracing each crack with cautious fingers, smoothing balm into his skin with slow care. Ethan held still, though his hand twitched at her touch. His throat tightened. For years, these hands had known only reins, pens, cold wood, not gentleness. Amara bent lower, whispering as she rubbed in the salve. "These hands labor all day. Without care, they will ache." Ethan could not hold back. His hand closed tight around hers. She startled, eyes wide, cheeks flushed in the firelight. You weren't asleep, she stammered. Ethan opened his eyes. His gaze was deep, shadowed, yet softer than it had been in years. He kept her hand in his and spoke low, hoarse. "Thank you." 2 words, heavy as stone long carried in his chest. Amara froze, lips parting without sound. Her hand trembled in his, yet he held on, unwilling to let the fragile light slip away. In that moment, there were no titles, no master and servant, no divide of color, station, or rumor. Only 2 souls, each worn by solitude, finding in the other a place to breathe. Ethan let her hand go at last, though his eyes did not. Amara bent her head, near to fleeing as she left the room, the tin of balm left open on the table. Silence returned, but changed. Ethan sat upright, his hand still carrying the echo of her touch. His heart raced like horses over the plains. He looked at the tin, the herb's faint scent rising like a mark left behind. That night, he did not sleep. In the darkness, he recalled the tremor of her hand, the gray-brown eyes caught between fear and resolve. From that night on, whenever the fire in the hearth sank low, Ethan found himself waiting for the gentle knock, the light steps, the small hand that set his feet in warm water. He did not speak it aloud, yet he knew a seed had stirred in barren soil, and its name was Amara Bennett. That winter storm swept Montana harder than any in memory. The prairie lay locked in ice, horses gaunt as they scraped for feed beneath snow. In the great house of the Radcliffe Ranch, the hearth still burned, but its warmth could not drive out the cold seeping into every seam of timber. Since her arrival, Amara Bennett had never once complained. She rose before dawn, lay down after all others, her hands worn by cold water, hard wood, flour, and ash. Ethan often saw her moving through the house like a quiet shadow. She left no words, only order, neat beds, a clean kitchen, basins of warm water waiting for him at night. But the body, no matter how strong, has its limit. One morning, descending the stairs, Ethan found the kitchen strangely still. No clatter of knives, no splash of water, only dim light across the floor. He frowned, called out, "Amara?" No answer. He entered, and his heart dropped. She lay collapsed across the table, curls tangled over her face, her dark skin gone pale. Her brow burned hot, sweat soaking her faded dress. A half-filled basin on the table showed she had worked until she fell. Ethan rushed to her, lifted her light frame into his arms. She shivered in his hold, and a surge of dread rose in him, the same dread that had gripped him the day he last carried Clara, her body already cold. "Amara, open your eyes. Hear me." His voice cracked, unsteady, no longer the voice of a master. Her lids fluttered. Gray-brown eyes drifted toward him, clouded. She whispered, thin as breath, I am sorry. I did not finish." Ethan's chest seized. "Do not say that. Do not apologize." He carried her swiftly to the parlor, laid her upon the long chair near the hearth, covered her with blankets. The fire was fading. He dropped to his knees, fed wood until flames leapt high, casting light over her weary face. Her breath came ragged, sweat streaming. Ethan soaked a cloth in warm water, pressed it to her brow. Each pass over her skin twisted something inside him. He had thought his heart hardened past all trembling. Yet one look at her fragile face made him feel again like a man at the edge of a cliff. Night fell. He did not leave her side. One hand held the cloth to her brow, the other gripped her fever-hot hand. At times her body jerked, words spilling broken from her lips. He bent close, whispering, "Do not fear. You are not alone." Her eyes opened once more, unfocused. For a moment she smiled faintly, then drifted under again. But it was enough. He knew she had heard. Through the long night he stayed, changing cloths, feeding the fire, gathering her trembling frame into his arms when the fever raged. The wind outside screamed, but for him there was only the fragile rhythm of her breath. When dawn broke, the fever eased. Her breathing slowed, her skin cooled. Ethan sagged with relief, body spent as if from battle. He sat watching her sleep, fear and gratitude rising in equal measure. Fear, because he knew if he lost once more, he could not stand again. Gratitude, because she still lay here, still breathing, still held within his reach. His hand brushed back the curls from her damp brow. He had not done such a thing since Clara's passing. Yet now his hand did not tremble. It had found where it belonged. Outside, the prairie gleamed under gold dawn. Within, Ethan Radcliffe sat silent, eyes reddened yet shining with new light. He knew then, the heart he thought long dead was beating once more, and it beat for only one, Amara Bennett. Amara recovered from her long fever, though weariness still marked her cheeks and eyes. Yet the moment she could stand, she returned to her duties as if unwilling to show weakness again. At dawn she rose to light the fire. At dusk she tidied the stables, and often she left a basin of warm water at Ethan's study door. Ethan saw it all. He spoke little, but his gaze followed her more closely now. In the past he had forced distance, wrapping himself in cold reserve, unwilling to sink into the pull of her presence. But since the night she lay burning in his arms, everything in him had shifted. He knew one truth: if he lost again, he would not rise. Now, whenever Amara entered a room, the air itself seemed to change. Her steps were soft, yet his heart jolted. Even a fleeting glance unsettled him with a confusion he had not felt in years. One late afternoon, as the sunset bled red across the windows, Amara carried in a tray of tea. Ethan sat at the desk, papers scattered, pen dropped idle. She set the tray down, about to leave, when their eyes met. That look was different. Not command, not distance. It was steady, deep, silent, as though words pressed behind it but could not escape. Amara flushed, bowed her head, and withdrew quickly. But she felt his gaze trailing her, smoldering. From then they moved like two souls, bound by an unseen thread. A brush of sleeves in the hall made them both startle. Fingers grazing when she passed a bowl left them breathless, retreating fast. Each small touch, each fleeting smile, thickened the air with sweet tension. Ethan knew the wall between them had thinned beyond holding, and Amara, her gray-brown eyes no longer fully fled. At times he caught in them a trembling light, like a confession unspoken. One night, wind howled against the porch, cold piercing through the house. Amara knocked, entered with a basin of warm water. Ethan reclined in his chair, eyes half closed. But this time he did not feign sleep. He looked straight at her. "You need—" "I will set it here for you, sir, and leave," she murmured, head bowed as always. Ethan did not answer at once. He sat forward, reached, not for the basin, but for her hand. Amara startled, breath catching. "Sir," she whispered. Amara. It was the first time he spoke her name, stripped of title or distance. His voice was low, rough, but steady. "I do not want you to stand far from me any longer." The room was so still, the crackle of the fire rang loud. Amara trembled, yet did not pull away. Her gray-brown eyes met his, for once without retreat. In that moment, Ethan was not master, not the man the town regarded with caution. He was only a man, weary of solitude, reaching for warmth. And Amara, the small black woman from far away, was that warmth. His grip tightened. She opened her mouth to speak, then lowered her gaze, leaving her hand within his. Fear surged in her, and shame, but with it spread something else. Relief, a quiet heat she had long denied herself. For years she had survived by silence, by stepping back. Now, before her, another door had opened. Ethan's voice dropped, almost a plea. "From this day, do not leave me alone again." The words cut through like a blade, severing all barriers. Amara's eyes glistened as she lifted them once more, then quickly lowered, hiding the tremor in her chest. But Ethan had seen, and he knew. The line between them, master and servant, loneliness and shelter, was broken that night. The study of Ethan Radcliffe glowed with firelight, shadows flickering against the walls. Outside, winter winds lashed the boards, but inside, warmth spread in a small circle cut off from the frozen world. Ethan reclined in his familiar chair, waiting for the quiet steps he had come to know too well on nights like this. The door opened. Amara Bennett entered, her usual silent bearing intact. In her hands, a basin of warm water, steam rising to mingle with firelight and soften the room in a haze. She bowed, knelt, ready to set his feet into the water. "Allow me to wash them for you, sir." Her voice was soft, like a prayer. But tonight, Ethan did not let the ritual begin. His large, calloused hand reached, closing around her smaller one. She lifted her gaze, gray-brown eyes startled, firelight painting her face with confusion. "No need," Ethan said, voice low, trembling. "Tonight, let me tend to you." Amara froze, breath unsteady, hands quivering in his grip. Since her first day, she had lived as a shadow, head bowed, giving only through small, quiet gestures. Never had she imagined hearing these words from him, the master sealed in silence and sternness. "Sir, she began. But before she could finish, Ethan drew her close. He was no longer master. His dark eyes held longing and fear, that the moment might vanish if he delayed. His hand brushed her cheek, heat rising through his palm. "Do not call me sir. Call me Ethan." In that instant, all barriers shattered. Ethan pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers. The first kiss was hesitant, trembling, then grew into a tide neither could resist. Amara closed her eyes, surrendering to his strong embrace, her heart pounding against his chest. Heavy clothes slipped to the floor, each layer falling like the chains that had bound them. Firelight danced over entwined bodies, no distance left between them. Ethan's every touch was careful, reverent, laced with the fear of breaking her, yet charged with the hunger to feel alive again. Amara whispered his name through quickened breaths, the sound striking his heart. He soothed her, every motion a vow that she would never again be alone. They met not as master and maid, but as two fractured souls binding together. On the cold boards, beneath the glow of fire, they gave one another trust, warmth, and a love already rooted too deep to deny. At last, when stillness returned, Amara rested against Ethan's chest, her breath unsteady but calm. He kissed her damp curls and murmured, "You have lit the fire in me again, Amara. I will never let it die." She smiled faintly, eyes shimmering as they opened. Ethan, one word, holding all her surrender, all her recognition. That night, the wind outside howled on, but in the wooden house there remained only warmth, heartbeats, and an unspoken vow. They were no longer shadows adrift, but two souls who had found life again in each other's arms. February in Montana was always merciless, but that year the sky raged fiercer than any winter before. From morning, the heavens hung heavy, gray clouds rolling like omens. By nightfall, wind screamed down from the mountains, carrying millions of snowflakes in whirling fury, battering the ranch windows as though to tear the house apart. Ethan Radcliffe stood at the window, his gaze dark. Beneath the roar, he heard the low cries of cattle stranded on the far range. The pregnant herd, if left in the open, would not last a single night. He threw on a heavy coat, pulled the fur hood low. Before leaving, his rough hand pressed Amara Bennett's shoulder. She had rushed to him, her gray-brown eyes wide with fear. "Stay inside, Amara," Ethan said, voice firm but edged with haste. "I have to go. We can't abandon the herd." "But out there," her voice broke. "The wind will swallow you whole." His grip tightened on her shoulder, his gaze steady. "This is my work. Trust me." Before she could beg again, he opened the door and plunged into the white storm. The slam left Amara in flickering lamplight, heart clenched tight. The blizzard was not only fierce, it was cruel. Within minutes, snow climbed Ethan's boots, the cold slicing through even his thick coat. He fought toward the outer pen, breaking a path, driving the cattle toward shelter. Each step dragged like stone. When the work was done, he found the storm worse. Snow blinding, wind howling, no path left to follow. Breath thickened to ice, his body heavy, darkness edged his sight. At last he fell, sinking into snow's grip. Inside, Amara could not bear the waiting. The storm's pounding roof and howling wind felt like a warning. She turned to old Mrs. Henderson, her voice hoarse. "If we leave him out there, he'll die." The housekeeper hesitated, then seized a cloak. "Come, girl. We won't let him face this alone." They plunged into the storm, a lantern swaying, nearly torn from their hands. Amara cried out, "Ethan! Ethan!" But her voice was devoured by the wind. At last, the lantern's glow revealed a figure half buried in snow. Amara stumbled forward, dropped to her knees, brushing ice from his face with trembling hands. "God! Ethan!" He still breathed, faint and ragged, lips blue. Amara wept, clutching him as she and Mrs. Henderson dragged him upright. Each step was a battle. Amara's arms clinging tight, her voice pleading over and over, "Hold on to me, Ethan. Don't you leave me." Back inside, they laid him by the fire. His clothes were frozen stiff, his skin ice cold. Mrs. Henderson's voice was urgent. "Fire alone won't save him. His body must be warmed now. Without pause, Amara stripped off her soaked cloak and pressed herself against him. Her small frame wrapped his, hands rubbing his chest, his arms, her tears falling with every breath. "No, you're not leaving. You still have me. I've never begged for anything. But now, I beg. Stay with me." Time stretched endless. At first, Ethan's body was stone, lifeless. Then, slowly, warmth seeped back, blood stirring with painful tremors. He groaned, lips quivering. Amara only held tighter, whispering, "You're safe now. You're home." At last his eyelids moved. Ethan opened his eyes, vision clearing. Before him was Amara's tear-streaked face, her hand gripping his as though to anchor him. "Amara!" His voice cracked, rough. She sobbed, pressing his hand to her cheek. "You nearly broke me with fear." In the blaze of the fire, Ethan knew this hand, the one that had washed his feet, spread balm over his cracks, was the hand that now kept him alive. And nothing could deny what had grown between them. He closed his eyes, not to escape memory this time, but to rest in a truth plain and sure. He had been pulled back from the edge by love. Spring came late to the Montana Valley. Snow melted into sodden earth, streams ran down the slopes, and wildflowers broke through in purple and yellow, signs of life returning. At the Radcliffe Ranch, after the savage blizzard, sounds of hammers mending fences and calves calling for their mothers filled the air. Peace seemed restored. But beyond the greening fields, another thing grew, whispers. Not flowers, but poison. At the saloon in town, voices rose in drink. Ethan Radcliffe, wealth, power, yet besotted with the black maid under his roof. Another barked a laugh, harsh as a blade. "That girl knows how to climb. Watch, soon she'll be in silks at his table." Mistress of the house, the men roared, mugs clashing, their laughter carried on wagon wheels and wind until it touched every corner of town. In church, when Amara sat in the back pew, women turned their heads, whispering behind gloved hands, eyes measuring every inch of her. In the market, when she bought flour and sugar, farmers' wives smiled sweetly, only to lean close and murmur once she turned away, smiles twisting bitter. Amara heard it all. At first, she clenched her jaw, telling herself to endure. But each word was a thorn under her skin, leaving burns no hand could hide. One morning at the market, she clutched her sack of flour when an old woman hissed, "Poor Ethan, all his wealth, and yet snared by a cheap black servant." Amara froze, face draining, hands trembling on the sack. She fled, but tears blurred her way home, each step heavier, each breath lodged in her chest. That night, in her small room, she sat by the wooden trunk, lamplight trembling over a face wet with tears. She lifted the lid, drew out a faded scarf, worn dresses, the meager relics of home. With shaking hands, she folded them, as though packing away her short season here. "Perhaps they're right," she whispered. "Perhaps I only shame him. A man like Ethan deserves better. Not me." Tears fell onto the faded cloth. Her heart broke, not from gossip, but from fear. That she was only a shadow here, a burden he must one day cast aside. Ethan came in from the stockyard, boots caked with mud. Passing the hall, he saw light spilling from her door. It stood ajar, revealing her trembling back before the open trunk. He knocked softly. "Amara?" She startled, wiping tears, pulling the lid down, but Ethan stepped inside. Firelight from the lamp bared her red eyes, the hurried bundles. "What are you doing?" His voice dropped low, sharp as night wind. Amara kept her head bowed, voice shaking. I cannot stay. They speak things I cannot bear you to suffer. I only bring you shame." Ethan strode forward, his hand gripping her shoulder, forcing her to meet his eyes. What burned there was not coldness, but fierce resolve. "Listen to me, Amara," he said, each word hard. "I lost everything once. Wife, child, a family. I thought I would live in shadow forever. Then you came carrying light. I will not lose you to the tongues of cowards." Tears streamed down her face. She shook her head weakly. "But they will despise you. They will call you blind." His grip tightened, voice breaking with rough emotion. "Let them speak. I lived too long by others' eyes, and all it left me was an empty house and a dead heart. This time I choose for myself." For us, Amara looked into him and saw fire. Not a man bowed, but one risen, unshaken in resolve. Her hands slipped from the trunk, letting it fall open, clothes spilling out. There was no path back. She fell against him, sobbing. Ethan held her tight, as though if he loosed her, the world's scorn would carry her off. His whisper broke against her ear, hoarse but steady. "I have borne too much loss, Amara. But I swear, you will never be one of them." In that small room, against the storm of voices outside, they found each other. Tomorrow, whispers would spread wider, eyes sharper in their contempt. But Amara no longer carried the weight alone. And Ethan, for the first time, cared nothing for the world's judgment. Amid cruel whispers, their love itself became defiance, the truest answer, strong enough to stand against any storm. On a late weekend afternoon, the town's large hall glowed with lamplight. People crowded in, laughter mingling with banjo strings and boots striking rhythm on the wooden floor. For a while, worries of work and hunger were set aside, replaced by warmth in the lingering chill of spring. At the Radcliffe Ranch, Amara Bennett sat before the trunk she had long packed. She had resolved to leave, to walk away from the cruel whispers. Then came a knock. Ethan Radcliffe entered, tall, his dark eyes carrying the weight of night itself. "You mean to leave me?" His voice was rough, firm. Amara lowered her gaze, her gray-brown eyes shining with tears. "I only shame you. They've said enough. If I go, you'll be free of it." Ethan stepped forward, seized her hand, forced her to meet him. "Amara, I'd rather live beneath rumor than in an empty house without you. I lost everything once. I won't lose again. Do you understand?" Her tears broke. She could not answer. Ethan shoved the trunk closed, his calloused hand resting firm upon it like a seal. "This ends here. You're not leaving that night." The hall blazed with light, townsfolk dancing. Amara slipped in, silent, standing at the back. Eyes found her at once, sharpened with scorn. Whispers hissed like snakes. "There. The Black Maid. Radcliffe's gone blind. What a joke for this town." Her head dropped, heart hammering. She wished to vanish. Then heavy steps cut through the room. Ethan strode forward, each stride unflinching, his gaze burning. He stopped before her. Silence swept the hall, the banjo's tune faltering against it. Ethan held out his hand, broad and steady. "Come with me." Amara's eyes widened. "Ethan." "No. They're watching, let them." His voice rang clear. I will not hide. You will not bow. She hesitated only a breath before placing her hand in his. Murmurs exploded, but Ethan held firm, leading her to the floor's center. The music slowed, deepened. Ethan's arm encircled her waist, his other hand clasping hers. They moved together. Around them stares shifted. Mockery, shock, disapproval. But Ethan's eyes held only her. In his hold, her trembling eased. He bent low, whispering, voice deep and warm. Lift your head, Amara. Let them see. Let them know you are mine for the first time. She raised her gaze without flinching. Lamplight caught her face, her eyes like dark jewels. Her dress twirled lightly as Ethan turned her, the hall falling into hush. No one dared break it. At last, Ethan pressed his lips to her brow before them all. In that moment, every whisper lost its sting. When the song ended, Ethan still held her, standing firm. His voice carried across the room. This is Amara Bennett, the woman I choose. Any who object may keep it to themselves. A heavy silence followed. Then, from the corner, slow applause began, spreading until the tension cracked. Doubt and disapproval lingered in some eyes, but scorn no longer held dominion. Amara leaned against Ethan's shoulder, tears falling with a smile. For the first time, she was not a shadow. She stood in light, seen, claimed, not by all, but by the only man who mattered. Ethan tightened his embrace, murmuring, "From now on, nothing will divide us." That night, as they returned to the ranch, spring winds carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Side by side, their hands entwined. The road ahead would be hard, but darkness had been pushed back. Before them all, they had chosen the harder way, the truest way. And Amara knew from that night, she was no longer only a servant. She was the woman he loved, strong enough to walk beside him against the world. After the harshest winter, Montana finally opened its arms to spring. Snow gave way to green shoots stretching along the slopes. Streams returned, whispering fresh and cool. Overhead, migrating birds drew their lines across the sky. At the Radcliffe Ranch, life stirred again. Fences raised, barns mended, calves playing in the pasture, proof that the earth had awakened. Within this rhythm, Ethan and Amara no longer hid in shadow. After the night of the barn dance, after Ethan had taken her hand before the whole town, they stepped into the light openly. They offered no defense, no argument against the whispers. Yet the way they walked side by side, his hand clasping hers in the street, spoke louder than words. In the mornings when Amara drew water from the well, Ethan was there, rare smile breaking his weathered face. He reached for the bucket, his rough hand brushing hers, an accidental touch that lingered. She flushed, turned away, yet her lips curved in a quiet smile. At the long table, things had changed. Once she sat at the far end, eating quickly in silence. Now Ethan pulled a chair beside him, his firm gaze leaving no choice. When she hesitated, he placed his hand over hers and murmured, "You belong here." Eyes widened around them, but no one dared object. In his gaze, her trembling heart found rest. In daily work, their bond ran like hidden water. Driving cattle, his hand sometimes touched her back, a silent check for her safety. Repairing fences, he brushed loose curls from her face and their eyes met, brief yet enough to tighten both their chests. At night, when chores lay still, Amara sat by the window, eyes lifted to snow-capped ridges. Ethan came, set a cup of hot tea in her hands. Their fingers touched on the porcelain, words unneeded. Silence held them, but their hearts spoke in 1,000 ways. One afternoon, she brought a basket of fresh bread to the porch. Ethan turned from the pasture, took the basket, and kept her hand in his. For a breath, the world fell away. He saw in her gray-brown eyes not only shyness but trust, shining steady. His grip answered for him. He would not let go. Their love was tender, yet fierce as spring itself. No oaths shouted, only a brush of hands, a meeting of eyes, enough to set both alight. Townsfolk still stared, with curiosity, disdain, or pity. But Ethan and Amara no longer bowed their heads. They did not need to hide. In every small act, they proved this love was no passing flame. It was spring rooted deep in their hearts. One night, beneath moonlight silvering the ranch roof, Amara leaned against his shoulder. His arm circled her, his warm hand resting over hers. She closed her eyes and let the wind carry her silent prayer. If this is a dream, let me never wake. Ethan bent, lips brushing her curls, answering with silence firm as stone. Spring had returned, not only to Montana's wide plains, but to the hearts of two souls who once thought life lost to them. This time it would not. Leave again. A windless Montana afternoon lay quiet. Thin bands of cloud drifted slow across the sky, and the last light of day bathed the valley in soft gold. Ethan led a horse from the stall, then turned and took Amara's hand. No words, only a firm squeeze and a look that held the weight of the world. "Come with me," he said low. Amara blinked, then nodded. They rode the same horse across the wide pasture, the damp earth and wildflower scent filling each breath. She leaned against his chest and felt the steady beat of his heart beneath his heavy coat. She did not know their destination, but an odd calm settled in her, as if this ride had waited for them both. When the sun touched the horizon, they stopped by a great cottonwood, its trunk rough and roots dug deep. At its base stood a small plain stone, the grave of Ethan's wife and daughter. Amara paused. She had heard of this place but had never come. Her heart tightened with pity and fear. Ethan dismounted and helped her down. His eyes stayed on the stone. Silence stretched, broken only by the wind in the leaves. "This is where I thought I'd bury the rest of my life," Ethan said, voice low and rough. "I sat beneath this tree 1,000 times, asking why God took it all. I swore my heart would not tremble again." He turned to her. The darkness in his eyes had changed. It was no longer only grief. Light burned there now, the light that came when he was near her. "But then you came. Not with silver or miracles, but with small things. A bowl of warm water, a gentle hand, a soft song in the kitchen. You did what I thought no one could. You made this heart live again." Amara choked on the words, her hands clasped. Cold wind teased her curls and drew silent tears. Ethan closed the distance and took her hand. Then, before the grave, he went down on one knee. There was no gold ring, no pomp, only a man's honest lines and a voice that trembled with truth. "Amara Bennett," he said, voice thick but clear, "I have nothing to offer but myself, a man broken who has wandered and lost, and now only wants to go forward with you. Be my wife, not a maid, not a shadow, but the partner I choose. Will you come with me?" She trembled, tears falling. All the old hurts rose up. The shouts that sent her away, the cruel whispers, the nights of crying alone. In that moment, they faded. Only the man kneeling before her, open and unhidden, remained. She sank down and cupped his face with wet hands. "Ethan, I will. If God led me here, then this is where I belong. I will go with you." For all the years he gathered her into his arms. Their breath warmed together. Under the cottonwood, where loss had once been the only witness, a new vow rose. No ring, no formal rite, but a sacred truth deeper than any ceremony. A man who had once known only despair, a woman who had wandered and been scorned, now found one another, chose one another, and feared the world no more. As dusk deepened and the sky turned violet, Amara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "From now on, I'm not an outsider." Ethan tightened his hold and answered, "No. You are my home beneath the witness tree of former sorrow." A new spring had started in their hearts. Dawn came soft that morning. The Montana sky washed in a pale rose glow. First light slipped across the ridges, spilling over the endless prairie. Radcliffe Ranch rose into that clean light, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to a new beginning. Out in the yard, beneath an arch woven of cottonwood branches, lilacs and wildflowers gathered from the valley, Ethan stood dressed in a plain black coat. No gold, no grandeur, only a face lit by a joy he had never worn before. Before him, Amara walked forward in a simple white gown, sewn in haste by Mrs. Henderson and a few town women. Her curls were pinned high, scattered with tiny blossoms. Her gray-brown eyes shone so bright in the morning light that Ethan felt his throat close. The townsfolk had gathered. Not many, but enough. Some eyes carried pity, some held caution. Most simply watched in silence. A few smiled, and children tugged each other's hands with whispers of delight. No one raised objection. The way Ethan stood proud, the way Amara stepped steady, silenced every tongue. The old preacher spoke, his voice steady. "Today we do not only witness a wedding, but a testimony that spring follows even the longest winter." Two souls once adrift, now found. Ethan turned to Amara and took her hand. "I have no gold ring to give," he said, his voice trembling with happiness. "But I have this life. I swear to love you, protect you, and call you my home." Tears streamed down Amara's face, but her smile was radiant. "I have no dowry, no claim of name, only this heart. And it belongs to you, Ethan." The preacher nodded and raised his hand in blessing. "I join you now as husband and wife. May the Lord keep you." Applause rose, hesitant at first, then stronger. Amara laughed through her tears in Ethan's arms, and he bent to kiss her. A kiss plain and sacred, more binding than any rite. The wedding feast was simple, spread across the ranch yard. Long tables covered in white cloth held fresh bread, roasted meat, cider, and milk. Children ran circles around calves. Men and women raised their cups. A banjo strummed, mingling with laughter. No longer cold or silent, Radcliffe Ranch breathed with the warmth of family. Ethan led Amara among them. He spoke little, but his gaze on her told all. This was his chosen wife. Amara, once only a servant girl despised by whispers, now smiled at his side, her eyes bright as though darkness had never touched her. Seasons turned. Summer's green gave way to autumn gold, and winter returned, no longer feared. In the big timbered house, the fire never failed, and laughter filled every room. Then, one spring morning, a newborn's cry broke the mist. Amara lay exhausted but glowing, a tiny daughter cradled to her chest, soft dark hair, warm pink skin. Ethan sat beside them, his rough hands trembling as he touched the infant's fingers. "Our daughter," Amara whispered. "Her name is Hope." Ethan gathered them both close, his eyes wet. In his arms, mother and child proved that God had not abandoned him, that spring had indeed returned after the longest winter. Later that morning, he carried the baby out into the rising sun. Light poured over all three. Amara sat watching, her face tender. Before them stretched a field alive with wildflowers, cattle grazing, and the steady pulse of life. Ethan kissed his wife's brow and murmured, "From a house once cold, I now have a family. All because of you, Amara." She pressed his hand and answered, "No, because of us. Because we never gave up." 2 years passed since the day Amara walked beneath the cottonwood arch in her simple white gown. The Montana prairie remained vast as ever, but Radcliffe Ranch had changed. It rang with children's steps and laughter, warm as any hearth could be. Amara was no longer the quiet maid kneeling at her master's feet. She was wife and mother, keeper of the ranch. Each dawn, with the mountains blushing pink, she carried her daughter, little Hope, to the porch, letting her hear the birds and breathe the scent of new grass. The child's gray-brown eyes mirrored her mother's, but her smile was pure Ethan, and each time it flashed, peace settled deep in his chest. Ethan, too, was changed. The man once shut away in grief had become a gentle husband. At night, after work was done, he sat by the fire with Hope in his arms, telling her tales of harvests and trails he had ridden. Amara sewed by the hearth, pausing to glance up, watching the years of sorrow lift from his face, replaced by quiet joy. The town changed as well. Old gossip faded. Some still looked askance, but more and more called her Mrs. Radcliffe instead of the colored maid. What scorn remained no longer held weight. Amara knew she no longer stood alone. She had her husband, her child, and a home no storm could shake. One evening, beneath the cottonwood where vows were once spoken, Amara nursed her daughter while Ethan sat close, tracing circles in the dirt with his hand. He lifted his gaze, sighing, with a peace he had never known. "I once thought I would never have a family again. But you've proven that spring always returns." Amara smiled and leaned against him. Their child slept soft in her arms, her breath mingling with the whisper of the prairie wind. 2 years on, their love was no longer the wildfire of its first nights, but a steady flame, one that would light them through any winter. Their story closed not with clamor, but with quiet peace. A man who had lost all, a woman once cast aside. Together they built a new home where laughter and the cry of children wove with the spring wind across the plains. The final truth whispered through every gust that crossed the grass. Spring always returns after the longest winter. The tale of Ethan and Amara ended, not with noise or spectacle, but with a hearth that never went cold, and a family's laughter carried wide. Love, when found, late, proved steady, enduring, and more profound than they had ever dreamed. Perhaps for many, love does not arrive in the bright days of youth, but in the years when we no longer expect it. And when it comes then, it is quiet, steadfast, and deeper than anything else. If this story has touched your heart, please share in the comments which moment moved you most. Don't forget to press like and subscribe so you can continue with us on this journey of telling Wild West love stories, tales of the frontier for hearts that still believe. After the longest winter, spring will always return.